right, do we have everybody back in the room? I think we have as many people as we'll get. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So I just wanted to do a quick pause and get everyone's attention because I recognize there's a lot of context involved in the field of OD, and especially knowing the history and the application and when it is helpful and useful to organizations. So I'm just going to slow us down just for a second and bring everybody up to speed on what a definition of organization development is. It's a body of knowledge and practice that enhances organizational performance and individual development by increasing alignment among the various systems, inclusive methodologies that help with, so from a business, right? You guys are business people. Strategic planning, organization design, so structure, roles, process, change management, leadership development, coaching, diversity, performance management. It's a lot of stuff, right? All of these fields interact with organization development. And it is important, organization development is important for organizations because it helps you change and be more effective. It helps you with your effectiveness and helps you transform. What Barbara's gift to this field has been large group interventions. So large group interventions help an organization change faster. So remember when I talked about whole system transformation on day one? That is a large group intervention methodology where you engage the entire organization in transforming to be more effective. So she's going to talk a little bit about some case studies and examples for you, right? Given the business lens that you bring, some of her experience working in large organizations in her life. Before we do that, the other thing I just wanted to touch on is women. Why are we talking about women? You're like, my company's fine. We have a lot of women in leadership positions. Why do we need to talk about women? We're talking about women because we're talking diversity. Diversity, there's research that's been shown that the more diverse teams that you have better collaboration, you have better innovation, better decision making, and better results. Our design team that planned this session were from India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Germany, the United States. We have men, we have women. So the more diverse a team you have, the better you're going to do on your business results. You're going to make more informed decisions. So for the people in Asia, encouraging women to speak up and to be a part of the team and to contribute is going to give you more innovation and more results. All right, and everyone, we're all at different levels and phases of this in our cultures and in our organizations, but it's important to continue to talk about this, right? The world is changing, and it's changing really fast, and you don't want to get left behind, right? You want to be competitive, you want to get market share, you want to be leading, you want to grow and be the 4th largest economy in 2050. That's huge, right? So that's why we're talking about diversity. And now I'm going to pass it off to Barbara, who's going to share some case studies from the business lens of how large group interventions can be applied. All right?
Thanks, Aria. Can we have the slides for large group methods? And
we got it.
With the, good. And can we have the second slide on innovators?
Yep, we're seeing it now.
Good, okay. So a few early stories. How did all this start? Well, I think it started with Marvin Weisbord, who wrote a book called Productive Workplaces and who is a well-known OD consultant. Marvin's father ran a factory, and every once in a while, Marvin would get hauled in to try to fix problems in the factory. And he would get everybody, you know, work with a unit, and it would get fixed, and then his father would say, well, you did great work, and it lasted for 6 months, and now they're just doing the same old thing again. So Marv decided, after trying unsuccessfully any number of times to fix problems in the factory, that what he would do is he would get the whole factory together and have them talk about why things that were decided didn't stay decided, basically. And so, you know, in one of the earliest so-called large group methods, Marv got them together, and lo and behold, after they worked together for a couple of days on how they were solving problems at the factory, things got a lot better, and they stayed a lot better. So that was, he wrote in his book on productive workplaces, he said, the principle here is getting the whole system in the room, that there are some kinds of organizational issues that if you don't have the whole system working on them, you can't solve them. They just keep coming back again and again and again. So that's one early kind of thing. Kathy Dannemiller, who was trained by Ronald Lippett, who worked with Lewin, was a very well-known consultant, and she worked a lot at Ford Motor Company, doing essentially training primarily of their managers. And so the Ford company came to her, she lived in Michigan, and they said, Kathy, they said, we would like to ask you to work with 500 of our managers. We think our managers are not proactive enough. They're not doing enough. They're not innovating enough. We want them to behave differently. And so we would like to offer you the very lucrative contract of, you know, training groups of these managers to behave differently. And Kathy looked at them and she said, I can't do that. And they were astonished because this was a lot of money, a lot of days of consulting. And they looked at her and they said, why? And she said, because it won't work. You can't train managers to be more proactive. It's a problem in the whole system. So they said, they just threw up their hands and they said, okay, they said, Kathy, what would you do? And Kathy said, I don't know. Give me a week and I'll make you a proposal. So she went away and she thought about what to do. And she came back to Ford and she said, okay, she said, I think we can really change these managers, but I need to have 500 of them at one time in one ballroom for 1 week. And that's the only way we can really do it. Now, what she was saying underneath all of that was, unless you change the whole culture, you won't change individuals. That culture change is a part of individual change, particularly if you want managers to behave differently. And Ford took a big risk, and they gave her 500 managers. And after that, after they went home, there were follow-up meetings and things like that. Things began to change at Ford. It was very successful. And the managers began to take more initiative and do things differently. And that was because they spent time together talking about what the organization was like and where it was failing and what needed to happen to move it forward. And they made some agreements about what they would do when they left that ballroom that they then checked on eventually and, you know, followed up with and kept going. So that also happened. And then I won't talk in detail about it, but Harrison Owen invented a very loosely structured method that does a similar kind of thing. It gets all of the participants in whatever it is in one place in a room in a big circle, and they have to figure out how to work on the problem. So what happened to Billy and I was that we were working together on a whole different project, and we had heard about Kathy's work, And we began talking about Marv's ideas, and then we began talking about what Harrison was doing. And we looked at each other and we said, you know, this feels like a whole new level of interventions. It feels different from what we have been doing, because most of us were doing team building, we were consulting to executive teams, helping them do strategic planning, all of that kind of stuff. And we said, wow, this is really different. And then we also looked at each other, and this is a sort of, I don't know if you've ever heard about the bubble up theory, but there are people who think that when things begin to change, they don't just change in one place. They may change in several places around the world at the same time. So that it is interesting to us that the group dynamics movement developed in the West, in the United States, as a result of the Second World War, et cetera, and Lewin and stuff. But at the same time, over in England, Wilfred Bion was treating returned shock shell veterans, and he invented group therapy, and he got all involved in group dynamics. So you had 2 or 3 places in the world where all of a sudden people were studying groups that never studied them before. And we looked at each other, we said, is it possible that that's what's going on here? We have a new sort of something that's bubbling up in the world, these large group things, and maybe there's more of them out there. So we didn't know. We had no way of knowing, and I was just lucky. A friend of mine, a colleague of mine, had asked me whether I would edit a special journal of the Journal of Applied Behavioral Sciences. And I had said back to him, well, I'll think about it. But the truth was I didn't have any particularly good ideas about what the theme of the journal would be if I edited it. You know, it was like a special issue. So it suddenly occurred to me, you know, one of the ways to find out if there's more things going on is to what we call in academia issue a call for papers. That is to say, you announce that you're going to do this special issue, and you invite people to write articles. And so I went to my colleague, who was the editor of the journal, and I said, look, we have an idea, but we don't know whether it'll work or not. And so what will happen, and he liked the idea, but I said, what will happen if nobody submits anything and we're wrong? This isn't just happening in a lot of different places. And he said, don't worry about that. He said, I have a lot of already published small group research papers. So we can have, if you don't have enough for a whole journal, I will call it large group and small group research. And you will do the front of the journal and I'll fill from the back, basically. So we won't have any problem. So I was quite relieved, you know, and so then we waited to see who we could find, and we started talking to people and asking people, and for heaven's sake, we had more articles. We didn't need any of his journals articles. We had more articles about things that people were doing that was bringing the whole system together to solve problems or to plan the future or whatever they were up to. And so that was the kickoff for the large group methods book that we did together. So I know you want to know more about kind of what types of things do we do. And so in the book that I held up a moment ago, we divided the case studies. It's a book full of case studies. We divided the case studies into the types of organizational challenges that these methods help you deal with. So I'm just going to talk about 3 or 4 very briefly to give you a feeling for what they're like. If you really want to know a lot of detail, there are several books, including mine, which have detailed case studies that will help you understand better. But the first one, and this is on the next slide, large group examples of organizational challenges. The first one is the case of the BBC, which is, as you know, the National Broadcasting Company in the UK. It's a huge organization, and it's controlled by the government. It has reporters and all over the world, so it isn't just in England, but it is very spread out. And it had been through a whole series of uh, revisions and structural changes and that sort of thing. And it was a very spread out organization, and so they decided that they wanted to have one BBC and that it needed to be more creative, that it had lost its creative oomph. So what they did was, Mayon Cheng Judge was the consultant, and the story that is written in detail is about a 2-year project where they used the Appreciative Inquiry Summit, which is one of these methods, to get people to think creatively about what was going on in this organization and what needed to change in order for it to be more creative and more on the forefront, etc. And it was a slow process because there were roadblocks from time to time, but it ended up that they invented a whole new way of being one BBC, and they also changed some structures and changed the incentive system and did a number of different things that helped them move the organization into a more flexible and a more creative organization. The second case is about, I've mentioned earlier, is about the University of Southern California School of Education. Lots of, not just colleges, but lots of organizations are either facing a situation where what they're doing is no longer particularly wanted, and they don't know what to do next. And so what needs to happen is some kind of strategic planning and scanning the environment to figure out how to be effective. And the Future Search, which Marv Weisbord created with Sandra Janoff, was the tool here. But I should say one thing about this situation, and that is that there was huge resistance. A lot of the faculty did not want to do anything differently. And so part of the issue here was to create a situation where people found resources inside themselves to want to change and want a different future. And the Future Search is kind of an emotional roller coaster, as Mark talks about it, but what it does is to help people really look at what's going on in the world and face the reality of what is happening to them, which most people don't want to face, and then say, okay, there are ways that we can move into the future, and so how are we going to do that? And it's a very creative and fun kind of process. I did one with the School of Management in Buffalo, and they created a whole new sort of set of curriculum and set of new relationships with the businesses downtown and that sort of thing. But it's a planning process. It's a group level strategic planning process that's very participative. And so that's the USC case. Now, American Airlines was also having a crisis. They were facing bankruptcy. This was at a time when oil prices were going up and customer participation was going down. And so they used large group methods. They used a method to get each of the participating groups, which would be the pilots, the flight attendants, the people on the ramps, the people who were selling tickets, et cetera, to sort of present the situation that American was in and to say, how can you contribute to our not going bankrupt? Okay, thank you. So a similar kind of situation happened with the Federal Aviation Association. Airplanes over the United States, there was a situation a few years ago where it looked like the delays on airplanes would be so severe because there were so many airplanes in the sky and not enough gates at the various airports. And so Marv and Sandra, in terms of Future Search, brought together all the stakeholders. And they had them, they created a format for them to talk to each other about the situation and they managed to create a plan, even though it was a very contentious and difficult situation, that actually the next summer did not have gridlock. So it was a huge success. It didn't solve all the problems, but it temporarily got them through a crisis that would have really caused a lot of upset and delay and loss of revenue in the United States. And finally, the Boeing Company, this is interesting, which has done a lot of work with these large group interventions, did something quite different after they had a big strike of engineers. And the engineers, of course, are professional people. And so these engineers don't usually go on strike. That is typical, much more sort of laborers, et cetera. So Boeing was the engineering group was very depressed. They did not feel that their skills were being well used by the company, and they didn't feel good about what was happening at Boeing. And so the folks that worked with them created a way of, said to them, there are some parameters. You need to create new patterns for working, ones that will satisfy you as engineers. And we'll be open to that. So, but we're not going to tell you what to do. You're going to have to figure it out. So what that meant was that they looked at why the principles, they taught them principles, widening the circle of engagement. So that means talking to more people, not just the usual people that you talk to, and creating a community for action. So figuring out what it is you want to do and embracing a democratic mindset. So they taught them some principles, and then each unit did what they felt they wanted to do, and they had some amazingly fun and interesting and very productive products as a result of all of this. So this is just a small sample of the kind of activities that go on using these methods. But let's close my talk before you talk with the core principles, which is the last slide. And this, I think, is something to be really thought about carefully, especially in terms of its translation to other cultures. Stakeholder inclusion. You never do a large group intervention unless you have a steering committee that represents all the people who may be involved, basically. So you include all levels of the organization, or all the appropriate levels of the organization. You never just stay with the organization. You always go outside the organization and say, what's happening in the world that's impacting us? And what is that? Where are we in terms of all of these kind of forces that are affecting us? Just as you're sitting here at round tables, hopefully mixed up with people that you don't know too well, all of these activities support getting to know multiple perspectives. That is, and all of them support the search for common ground. In other words, there's a variety of strategies in these methods that help people figure out not what they disagree about. People are very good at figuring out what they disagree about. People are less good at figuring out what they agree on. These methods have very good strategies for helping people understand where they might agree with each other. So these are very interesting methods to be considered when you're thinking about change and improvement in organizations. I'm going to stop at this point and turn this over to Ariel to see if do we have time for them to talk to each other, Ariel, or what's the plan here?
So we're a little bit behind, so we're going to do something a little different. We're going to have another summary wrap-up from this conversation, and then we're going to go to our next presenter. So unfortunately, we don't have time to talk at the tables. But I just wanted to leave you with a couple of thoughts is with the power of this process is that it aligns and engages your organization in a change. So you need alignment and engagement and change adoption to implement a new process, a new strategy, so on and so forth, right? And when you have some of these elements, you get everybody in the room, everyone in your organization in the room. When you have inclusion, you make it safe for people to talk. You get a shared understanding of what the problem is, and you co-create the future together. So what's so powerful about this, I changed my career because of this process. I saw how powerful it was because you get unleashed energy and momentum, and everyone in your organization is pointing in the same direction, and they've supported the change, they agree with the change, and they're gonna help with the change. So just wanted to wrap up. Any final thoughts, Barbara, that you'd like to share with the room?
Yeah, I think that sometimes it sounds like, from what Ariel said, that everybody has an equal voice. Everybody has participation, but when you plan these things, it's quite possible to say, to draw a line about what the participation is going to be for, so it's not like you're giving the organization away to everybody in the organization. These events have focus, and there's a particular thing that people are asked to contribute to and asked to make decisions about. And one of the successful ones are very clear from the beginning what the role of the participants is to be. And it isn't necessarily to make all the decisions in the organization forever. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Barbara. We appreciate your time and your contribution to this field as being one of the first leading women of your time to really make an impact. So we are so appreciative, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
And before our next presenter is going to be, we're going to get her ready on the technology, but before we do, I wanted to bring up Jimmy George. Jimmy George is a OD consultant and expert from India, and he's going to put a business lens to this to kind of synthesize and wrap up the dialogue.
Thank you, Ariel. Hi. Great. You know, friends, when I attend seminars and workshops like this in various places, in the evening when I leave the place, I ask myself a question. What am I taking away? And most of the time, and I've done the survey, and I found that 1 or 2, or maximum 3, solid insights, ideas, lessons you pick up, that stays in your mind, and you're going to apply and make changes in your life and in your organization's life. My first point, all of you are in organization development. Every person sitting here is an organization developer. When you do your job in a better way, when you add value to your contribution, what you do in your organization, you are developing your organization. So primarily, all of you are in organization development. Whenever you're doing a good job in your company, you are developing your organization. That's the first point. Now, Barbara has given us a perspective of last 70, 75 years of organization development. Me and my group members, we were asking, what is the relevance of this for the 2020s and 30s? That Kurt Lewin started the process of applied behavioral psychology in developing organizations. And 2 gentlemen, Richard Beckett and Blake, they went to General Mills for an organization-wide training program. The title of the training program was Bottom-Up Management. But they did the program successfully, and they wanted to submit a thesis of what they have done to the university. And it occurred to their mind that this title, Bottom-Up Management, won't help us much. So let's retitle So they gave a name, organization development. That's how the branding happened. And from that to date, it has evolved, and so many brilliant minds have contributed to that. Now, what will you take from this? What's your takeaway? That's my point. And in just 5 minutes, I'm going to give you the takeaway, which is of relevance to all of you, rest of your life. Number one, action research, action learning. Action research, you can see that in that these two words are the action research and action learning. Actually, even there also, there is a branding issue. It was originally research action. So whatever you do, the gist of that is you have to first do research. And then you need to unfreeze things. What's the status quo? For example, you have got an ice cube of square shape. Now you want an ice cube of round shape. What you do? You cannot break that. So you melt it, you unfreeze it. Then you put that in a different container of the round shape. It takes that shape. And then you have a new shape. The same way, if you want to make changes, you need to first unfreeze what's happening. And then you refreeze it. You take certain actions. So unfreezing, actioning, and then defreezing, refreezing. Now, combine action research with action learning. Action learning is when there is a problem in the organization, a group of people come together and they ask certain questions. What's the problem? Why is it happening? What can we do? How can we do? When can we do? Who is going to do it? A group of people brainstorming, asking good questions, and solving organizations' problems. And if there are multiple groups, they can make large-scale transformation in the organization. So, action learning has been transformed into large-scale learning and change and transformation. So, combine action research and action learning. Two concepts, if you combine, you have a very powerful tool. This is the heart of classical organization development, action research and action learning. The third point, very important today, group dynamics. In the 50s and 60s, the dynamics were between individuals and teams within a company. Today, the group dynamics are completely different. I am talking to a person from Singapore. I am talking to a person. I am interacting with a person from Indonesia and Myanmar, from Japan, from America. Today, the group dynamics are multicultural. Today, the group dynamics are multi-continental, intracontinental. So, the group dynamics now takes a different shape. So, you need to understand as OD specialist, your ability to connect with people, your ability to interact with others, understand others, and work with diversities. Not only gender, even multi-racial, language, communities, religions. So, group dynamics is very, very important as far as organization development is concerned. And finally, so I said action research, action learning, you combine it. Group dynamics, it's very important. Now, what is missing there is she stopped at 2010. After 2010, what happened? Globalization. Digitization. Now, technology is going to take the world by a storm. So I conclude on this point. You need to now bring technology on top of all these pearls of wisdom. These are all pearls of wisdom. Action research, group dynamics, applied behavioral psychology, appreciative inquiry, systems theory. It's a very important part of this, that you need to see the whole system transformation. The systems theory, understanding of the system is very important. And theory X, theory Y, personality aspects, psychometry, all these things are there. They're all pearls of wisdom. But you need to take 2 or 3 core concepts from this. apply it for the future. Future is these pearls of wisdom, well interspersed, mixed, synthesized, processed with application of technology. And your ability to see the entire organization as a living system. The moment you see the entire organization as a living system, you have solutions, you can apply all these principles. Hope I could give you some insights. Did I give you some insights? That's your takeaway. Thank you.